Hey everybody, wanted to talk to you today about the 5 questions that you should ask before building an app. For those of you who don't know, my name is Doug. I run an app development company called Shrine Development, and we specialize in building apps for startups and enterprises, typically people who are in some sort of a time crunch. They want to launch a product fast, and they want to do it with speed and confidence. And I wanted to talk to you today about the questions that you need to consider outside of development. So let's assume that Shrine Development takes care of all your development. Still, as an owner of an app, there are a lot of questions that you need to answer before you start. The number one issue I see when people are building apps is that they want to go fast, and so in the name of going fast, they end up skipping steps. And I put together a list of questions here that I think if you can answer these, then you're in a pretty good spot. If you can't answer these, no problem. It's just something to consider before you get started. Because just like building a skyscraper, you don't want to be making modifications in the middle of the building process. The time for those conversations, the time for that planning is before the building starts. So with that in mind, let's get started. Number one question: how do you make this app valuable enough that people want to use it every day? A lot of times people will come to me and they have sort of a compelling story on why someone might use the app, but it doesn't really have a story wound into it that would make it something that people have to use every day. You know, an app that people are going to use once every 6 months probably is something that you don't want to do unless you're augmenting an existing business. The reason is that people are stuck in their habits to some degree, and really, when you're launching a new product, you're asking people to change what they do in their daily processes. You know, you're asking people to use your app instead of doing something else. And so in order to do that, I think it's really important that you make sure that there's enough value there that it makes it worth the time to go through, download the app, if it's a mobile app, or log on to the website if it's a web app, and actually go through and set up a user account, configure it. You know, this was one of the big issues that Twitter had, for instance. You know, why is Twitter not as popular as Facebook? The answer has to do a lot with how hard it is to actually get started using Twitter. You log on to Facebook, you can instantly get synced up with a couple of friends you know, and you can get started. With Twitter, they make you configure it, you have to choose categories, it's very complicated. So with that in mind, you need to make sure that the value is high enough to make people actually want to download your app. When you're considering this, it's also important to consider, do you want to have a web app or a mobile app? For those of you who don't know the difference, it comes down to this. A mobile app is something that you would download from an app store. It's something that you would download from the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. Mobile apps are considered higher-end experiences because you actually get a spot on someone's home screen. The user doesn't have to go to a browser and type in an address. They can just tap on the button and they're there. The issue with mobile apps is that they are more resource intensive and more expensive to develop. And so usually if you can test out your idea through a web app, which is something that you would just go to in a browser, so if you open up Internet Explorer, Chrome, Safari, and you type in an address and you go there, that's a web app. Those are a little bit faster to launch and don't take quite as much time. So if you can prototype your idea, get it into a web app, and then do a mobile app, that is sometimes considered ideal versus just jumping into a mobile app. That said, there are 2 reasons that I would recommend you consider a mobile app right away. The first reason is there are certain things that a mobile app can do that a web app can't do. For instance, I mentioned being on the home screen. That's one thing. The second part would be like higher-end graphics. You know, video games, those types of things typically do better on mobile apps. So that's like, you know, performance consideration. The second part is a user experience consideration. Again, it's much easier to use a mobile app because mobile apps usually are catered to one use case, whereas a website is usually, or web app, I should say, is catered to multiple uses. So you'll notice apps like Uber those are going to be mobile apps because that's a pretty sophisticated process. You're accessing your GPS location, which is not easy to do on a web app. So that makes sense why Uber is a mobile app. Also, the experience is pretty clean. It's pretty interactive if you think about it. You're opening up, you're seeing this map. There's a lot going on. So in that case, a more polished app or a larger app would make sense as a mobile app, something like an Uber. Now, consider how much funding goes into an Uber, though. Apps are not just two kids in a room just hacking around on something for a weekend. They are more akin to building a building, and these apps can cost anywhere from $40,000, $80,000, $500,000. There are companies who raise tens of millions of dollars to build an app. So really make sure that you have, I talk about this later, but make sure that you're realistic about what you're getting yourself into. So along the lines of value, consider what happens when the first set of users actually go to use your app. A lot of people have a very compelling story about making their app exciting when they have thousands of users, but it's really important that you add value for your first user. And so the way I think about it is that the app or the platform should provide value to the first user. Maybe it's not as much value as when there's a million users, but you have to get some sort of initial value, some sort of utility. This play is called utility to network effects, meaning network effects are great. So why will another Facebook not probably come around for a long time? Because there already is one Facebook, and everybody's on that Facebook. Your friends are already on Facebook. So even if there's a Facebook 2 that had the same functionality, very few people will use it because there's no reason. Everyone's already on Facebook. That's why Craigslist sticks around, even though Craigslist looks like absolute garbage. A lot of people were on Craigslist already. So it just keeps the momentum going. And network effects are one of the few defensible positions these days. Technology, the barrier for entry for technology is always getting lower. But when you have network effects, which means lots and lots of users, that can be sticky and that could be defensible. But it can't be the first reason. Again, people won't join an app that other people need to join in order to become valuable, unless there's some sort of weird hack or social hack or one-time event that you do. I'm using hack here not in terms of like hacking a computer. I mean just like you figure out some way that you can get 5,000 people to use your app, and it's like a one-time sort of kickstart. But again, the network effects is going to be the defensible thing, but it's also got to be the second or third tier of value. So 0 for 1, that term actually comes from a book by that title from a guy named Peter Thiel, who's a famous investor. Great book if you haven't read it. Distribution. How are you going to get this app into the hands of your users? Are you going to go direct? Are you going to advertise? Are you going to try viral growth? What is the actual distribution strategy? Mobile apps are usually a little bit harder to get distributed versus web apps, but it can be done. But it's just important to consider what kind of market are you going into and how is it going to be distributed. The market actually is something to really consider. And in fact, there's a saying that the market always wins. And so if you're a great team going into a poor market, a lot of times the poor market will win. But if you can hit a great market and consider how you distribute into that great market, you'll be much, much further ahead. And really, as I said before, the technology is absolutely paramount to making the app successful, but as probably even more important is how do you sell this thing? How do you distribute it? Is it channel? Is it direct? Make sure you consider these things before you get building. Funding. Apps are, in my opinion, they're something you make an investment into. They're something that you have to invest usually thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars into before you see a return. So make sure you understand what your return is going to be and how long you're willing to wait, and then make sure that you have capital lined up to cover the costs in the meantime. And one thing I'll say about fundraising is it's an absolute art, and if you haven't raised funds before, it takes a lot longer than you think it should. If you think that you have investors in the wings and you talk to someone, you talk to a friend or a family at a party and they said, yeah, I'm definitely in, you're probably 6 to 9 months before closing that person. If you have a term sheet you're probably still 6 to 8 weeks away. So make sure you give yourself enough timeline to get the investment, or figure out how does this app become an extension to your business that it generates extra revenue that can pay for the app. Figure out what is the timeline and the schedule for that. Lastly, let's talk about monetization. The apps are typically hard to monetize unless you are very specific about how the revenue will, unless you really tie the value to the revenue. Meaning this, you can't just throw a couple ads in an app and say, oh wow, I'm just going to advertise and then I'll make money. Ad blockers will block your ads. People don't want to see your ads, and it's just not going to work if the only thing you're going to do is ads and you're not absolutely ready to go to Facebook level scale. Your typical app in the beginning is going to have better luck, either monetizing by increasing the revenue of the company it's a part of. Think of it as an extension. So if you have an app, let's say you sell yachts, and you have an app that is going to attract buyers, allow them to customize their yacht, and you think that this app will generate 3 extra yacht sales in a year, and that'll generate an extra $500,000 into the company. In that case, it makes sense to invest $50,000 in an app. It's a 10x return. Where it doesn't make sense is if you have something where you say, okay, I'm going to help the users with a small problem. I think that this problem is worth $3 to them, and I'm going to get 1,000 of those users, so I could make up to $3,000 a month. Well, but the app costs $150,000 to build. That just doesn't quite make sense. You got to make sure that the monetization is real, that at least there's a plan behind it, because as any business owner will tell you, that things never quite work really as smoothly as you plan. But I think that you should, at least I always like to plan ahead of time and try to set the plans so that, hey, if this works, it works. Meaning, if all goes well, this thing will work out, versus I'm just going to get started. We'll see how it goes. Maybe it makes money by XYZ. Maybe I'll take the data and sell it to a hedge fund, or I'll take all the data and sell it to Spotify. Or, I hear ideas that that not only would the app have to work on a grand scale, that you would have to then go to a buyer to give you money that doesn't even know about you, and you're not even sure if they're really interested in what you're selling. So again, please try to work monetization early into the process. So again, to recap, really, I think that it's when you're building an app, ask yourself these questions ahead of time, and you'll save yourself a lot of time and money down the road. Because I wouldn't recommend using your development process as the prototyping process. So make sure you set your business case first, your business model first. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be 500 pages. I think that there was this bad rap that planning got, that people would plan for 2 years and then try to launch an app. That's not what I'm recommending. What I'm saying is, if you can come up with answers to these questions, and you can do that in a couple weeks, then get into the prototyping stage, which means work on the mock-ups, work on the plan, and then go to development. I believe that's a way to save a lot of money and time and headache, because I really believe that these are major investments that you make, and they're awesome, and technology and software are eating the world, and it's absolutely worth doing, but it's worth doing right, and doing right the first time. So hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Happy to talk, and hope you have a good day.